All right, hello everybody. Today we are going to be talking about art licensing, specifically how to find and approach manufacturers for licensing. So if you are an artist, this is a good spot to be in to learn a little bit about licensing and how you can initiate that sort of process. So we'll be talking a lot today about where you can find manufacturers who might be interested in licensing your art to, and then how you should first approach them to start that dialogue and see if it's going to be a good fit. So, moving in the slides, I'm going to tell you just a quick bit about myself because I think a lot of people here are new from what I'm seeing. But I don't want to dwell on this, so don't worry, I'm not going to do 20 minutes about myself and 10 minutes of content. That's not my style. And I'm going to go ahead and give myself permission to turn off my video so I can really focus, look at my notes, and not feel bad that I'm looking at my notes instead of the camera. But I'll come back on periodically as needed, so you'll get to see my beautiful face again. Also, a bit of housekeeping. Oh, maybe I should be careful and not turn off the audio too. So a bit of housekeeping. Sorry for that, you guys. If you have any questions throughout this lecture, please feel free to put them into the chat. I'll be answering those if they come up while I'm talking about a topic that feels appropriate for me to address the question then I will make sure to cover it then, but otherwise I will make sure to cover it at the end. So you should have all your questions answered. I don't like to leave a stone unturned, as they say. So a little bit about me. I'm Laura C. George, as it says on the slide, and there's my pretty face again. And I teach artists how to build really great careers for themselves, careers that don't just support them financially, but also support them emotionally. And I've been doing this for around 5 years, and I spent several years actually, before that researching the industry because I was kind of exploring the possibility of being an artist myself. Ultimately that wasn't something that I enjoyed, that didn't turn out working well. I don't think I'm quite a very good artist, but I do find it thrilling to teach other artists who are really great at it and to help them create successful businesses that really work for them. And I'm really pretty good at it, so that works out quite well. If you want to know more about me, of course, just go over to my website, lauracgeorge.com, visit my About page. There's plenty of information there. But let's go ahead and get to all the good learning. So, what is the hardest part of licensing your art? Right? The hardest part of art licensing is actually getting the contract right. Yeah, I mean, I think probably this is really intimidating. And, I always recommend that you hire a lawyer at least to review that final contract. So while this is stuff I go over in my course that I'll talk about later, but I do think that it's things that maybe aren't as easy to approach in a low-key setting like this. So I'm actually going to talk today about the second hardest part, which is finding and approaching those companies that would want to license your work. And it's really a big idea, and you're probably not quite sure where to start. So, we're going to start by finding them, right? That's probably the simplest way to go ahead and start working in art licensing, is just to find people who might be someone who would want to license your art. So the 5 common ways, I find these to be the most common, though of course there are plenty of other ways to find companies to work with. The 5 most common ways are licensing shows, Googling for manufacturers, artist websites, Googling for artists in the product type, and roaming stores. Okay, but I'm going to get into each of those, of course, a little bit more in depth. So let's start with licensing shows. The top licensing shows I've listed out here on the slide for you because it's really important. There are, tons of different shows you can go to, and especially really niche specific, very focused shows that are for, a particular industry. But these are like the most popular shows that tons and tons of manufacturers go to looking for new talent. And those, of course, if you're not watching, if you're just listening, are Surtex, Licensing Expo International, the National Stationery Show, and America's Mart Atlanta. Okay, so most other shows aren't probably going to be worth it unless you're looking for a really particular type of product to put your art on, and so you're picking a show that's like super important for that niche industry, and everyone in that industry attends that show. Okay, now licensing shows aren't for everyone because they're a really big commitment. To get the most out of a booth that you would have at one of these shows, you're going to want to visit the show the previous year, which is typically in the industry called walking the show. And when you walk the show, it lets you learn how everything works, and you can go ahead and meet some of the licensees and other licensors like you, other artists who are looking to license their work. You can ask questions of everyone and get lots of information on the industry. And most of these shows have really great panel discussions and workshops and stuff that you can attend and get really good information to help you get started. So attending the show the year before, not as an exhibitor, walking the show is really ideal. It's not required, but I think it's pretty essential, especially if you do want your booth to succeed the next year, when you actually exhibit at the show. It's also expensive. When you get a booth, walking the show is not that expensive. The ticket to attend, more than we'd like because we'd like it to be free, but not that expensive. But when you do get a booth, it's really expensive. It can sometimes be like thousands of dollars, depending on which show and what amenities that you require. Your booth, they have all these add-ons, and you'll have to decide which add-ons for your booth are important. Do you need walls? Do you need lights? And the cost can skyrocket, right? And then on top of that, you have travel costs, you have shipping costs if you can't get all the products and supplies there yourself. And then you have the costs of all the supplies that you need to make your booth look better, like display equipment. And then you also really do need to hire a helper to come along with you. You might be able to convince a family member or a friend to do it for free, but you need someone there at the booth with you. You're going to need to go to the bathroom. These are like really long, full days, and often for multiple days in a row. So, you're going to need to take a break every once in a while, maybe get something to eat without nomming down in your booth in front of everyone. So, and it's also good to have someone next to you for if you are talking with a manufacturer that you're really interested, and then someone else walks into the booth. You don't want that other person to be ignored because you're in a pretty deep conversation with someone that might pan out. So having someone else at the booth who kind of has a general idea of what's going on can be really helpful because they can start that discussion with the new person while you finish up with the last person, so no one gets ignored. There's also no guarantee with licensing shows, and this one makes everyone upset, but you're out all of that money that it costs to be in the show before you get any contracts, and there's no guarantee that you're going to end up with any contracts. Usually you're going to, most artists do, but especially that first year, when no one knows you, it's definitely not guaranteed. And it's not even, it's kind of up in the air. It's probably likely that you would get a contract, at least one, but I wouldn't, be confident. Other things that are difficult is prep time. There's a lot of work. I think a lot of artists just assume that the work is really in the show days, but leading up to it, it can take weeks to prep. There's lots of planning that goes into making sure that you have enough of the product, you have enough display equipment, you've got, all sorts of papers that you might need to hand out and things like that. And then, of course, the time commitment at the show is huge, multiple days usually, and long days. And usually you won't be able to sign deals actually at the show. It's very rare that you'd just be like, we're completely on the same page, here's a contract, signed and done. That usually that process takes a while, so the work continues in the weeks and the months following the show. So there's a lot of time involved. And then the last negative thing, before I talk about the great things about licensing shows, because they really are pretty good, the last negative thing is that a lot of manufacturers really won't work with someone the first year that they see them at that show. The manufacturers kind of consider it a multi-year endeavor. They want to see you come back a second or even a third time before they really consider purchasing a license for some of your work. Some of them say that it's because it proves that you're serious, that you know what you're doing. And sometimes they say that it, proves that you can stick to something and they want to work with someone who they know they can trust to really stick it out and be professional. Not all manufacturers follow that idea, but enough of them do it that it's noteworthy. It's something that I should tell you about, right? But really, I'm not trying to deter you completely from licensing shows. If you can combat these negatives, or if you feel okay with these negatives, then the shows are actually the very best way to reach a manufacturer. They're far more interested and responsive when they find you through an industry show where they're already looking for new artists. They're there for that very purpose. So they're going to be a lot more responsive there than when you approach them through phone or email or snail mail or however. And then they can also see much more of you at the show. It's a lot easier to feel connected to someone and to go to bat for them when you've actually met them and you're talking to them in person. And you'll come off a lot better than you would through email. While I'm a huge proponent of email and I like that you can take your time to kind of think about what you're going to say, most people come across a lot better in person still. There's just something about that human connection. So you have to decide whether licensing shows are right for you or not. I can't tell you to do them or not to do them. I can tell you that they're fantastic, but that there are a lot of negatives. So it really depends primarily on your resources, mostly time and money. So let's move on to the next way to find manufacturers, which is Googling. So this I find to be just a really simple no-brainer. Just Google for manufacturers, and here are some of the terms that I use are art licensing manufacturers, companies who license art, manufacturer art submissions, bedding manufacturer in the USA, Googling terms that would show up on someone's website, on a manufacturer's website. Super simple. And actually the next couple of these ideas are really simple, low commitment ways to find manufacturers. You'll have to weed through some of the results when you're Googling like this. There's going to be print it yourself sorts of companies, and you're going to have to find, amidst all those results, there are usually a few great ones in the first couple pages, so you don't need to go through hundreds of pages or anything, but go through the first 5 pages or so, and you can usually find some really good manufacturers. But you do need to kind of be paying attention. Not everything that shows up in the results is actually going to be a manufacturer who will license your art with a professional licensing relationship. You can also search for, specific types of products, like the bedding manufacturer in the USA that I've put up here, notebook manufacturer or whatever. Take common text that you might see on the right websites for these manufacturers and then search that, and if you pair it with phrases like company art submissions or product, submit your art, or something like that, that can often yield really good results. You have to play around a little. Some search terms, like, for your art to be considered, please submit. That's a common thing that you would see on a manufacturer's website, but that's also a common thing you'd see for literary blog submissions, or I combined those two, literary magazine submissions or blog submissions. That's what I'm trying to say. So you do have to be careful to weed through the results, because sometimes you'll get things that you didn't initially intend to get. Let me go ahead and read this question that Laura wrote in. Yes. I'll answer that one at the end, actually, because that doesn't have to do with any of this, but I'll get to it. So this Googling thing is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but make sure that you don't just like approach every single company that you find on Google. Like actually weed through them and make sure that it's appropriate for what you're trying to do. So the next method is artist websites. So this is a really kind of fun way to do it. I find it like kind of like a game. You look at other artists who are licensing their work, and you can also even just go to the websites of the other artists you like, just like any other artist you like, and preferably an artist whose work is kind of similar to yours, has a similar vibe or similar audience. And on those websites, you might actually find a mention of the manufacturers that they work with. It could be on their blog, it could be on their licensing page, because a lot of artists have a special page just for licensing. It could be on their about page, their CV, that kind of stuff. Those are the common places that you'd see it. They might not mention any manufacturers on their site. So this is where it's kind of like a game, because you never know what you're going to get, because every artist's website is different. So you have to just kind of dive in and take a look around and spend some time kind of combing their site to see if you can find it. I'm going to try to share my screen for you and show you some of the examples that I've pulled up. Oh yay, it's working. Okay, so here I've pulled up Sarah and Ruby, which is a design team, and I just found this particular page that says Designs for Gildery, which when I checked it out is a company that licenses artwork. I just found it on their collaborations. And even when I first found it, this was like a drop down. When I hovered on collaborations in their navigation, it dropped down and had a couple different names here. And now when I click on it, I guess they've just stopped collaborating with anyone currently except for Gildery. But I click on it and collaborations, here they are. Right? Super easy. And so it's sort of like a special page for licensing. And here is another one that on Vet Marie's site, it's right under her services tab. It says art licensing. And I just clicked that and here I am, and it talks about a couple of the companies that she licenses with. And of course these are not made for you, these are made for other companies who may want to license art from these artists, but it's still very helpful for you to look at. You can get a lot of information. And the last one I wanted to show you is Richard Faust, who on his about page mentions his clients, right? So this is just his about link, and he has a whole client list right here. And I mean, some of these are not licensing deals, but like work for hire, like freelance things, but you can definitely check these places out and see that some of them were actual licensing deals, right? So I'll finish with that and move back to the slides. There we go. So those are some great examples of looking on these websites and finding, just kind of sleuthing around and finding really good information. Other ways that you can kind of use artists is just contacting artists that are licensing. Ask them who they're licensing to. Most artists are actually pretty friendly and willing to help out those who are kind of new to the licensing game. It's not competitive, or it's not as competitive as like gallery showing artists, that world of like sharing collector information, not so much. That's not gonna fly. But asking another artist to share who they're licensing with is a lot less of a scary thing for them, and they're a lot more friendly with it. It's really surprising. The world of art licensing is actually pretty chill. They're pretty casual. You can also utilize other artists by Googling for interviews that they've done, like Googling just like artist interview, right? In a lot of interviews, they'll mention companies that they work with offhand. And I'll share again on my screen because I have a few that I pulled up here. So, here's one, here's just a great interview, couldn't think of the word, from Regina Chu. And, she mentions PTS America and Crane and Company. And then on the same blog in another interview, B mentions Cranston Printworks. And in this interview, over on, Blue Penny, I couldn't remember where, Phyllis Dobbs mentions Evergreen, which is another company. And in this interview on Wyndham Fabrics blog, I found this through Googling, Kelly Ventura did an interview with the company that she's licensed her art to. And I just was Googling Kelly Ventura interview, and voila, it popped up on the actual company's blog, right? So it can actually be, really interesting. And so I don't want you to be afraid to get clever. In the midst of all this searching, you might run across a licensing agency, and you take a look at who they represent. And then you go to those artists' websites, and you can look for the same things that we looked at here, right? Like, just because you run across something that isn't a good fit, like if you're not interested in using an agency and you happen to run across an agency, like, that doesn't mean that you can't go ahead and use that information in a different way. So try to think kind of like a detective. Get a little sleuthy, right? It's not about how you find the manufacturers. It's just that you find them at all, and then what you do once you found them. So, follow any links that you think might turn into something, right? So moving on, you can also Google for artists with the product type. And this is a strategy that I use a lot to find some great manufacturers, especially if you know what kind of product you're looking to create. So, for instance, when I Googled Natasha Westcoat decal, I came up with things that weren't decals and also things that were. But Google showed me a tapestry that she has with Fine Art Tapestries, a duvet cover that she has with Deny Designs, and a bunch of device cases and skins that she has with Skin It. And then when I Googled Laurie Siebert Stationery, on the very first page of Google, Lang, C.R. Gibson, Dim Deco, and Lean & Tree, which are huge manufacturers, right? The very first page, I found all of those big ones. And so if I were new to art licensing and didn't know any names of any licensing companies, bam, tons of really great ones right there. And the same, like Jill Meyer, Art Home Goods was a Google search that I did, and within a couple pages, I found both Art House and Thumbprints, which are only slightly smaller, So the first page of Google results can be helpful, but make sure you do take some time to go in a few pages. I usually say about 5 pages, because you can sometimes find some really nice manufacturers down lower, and also the smaller the manufacturer, the more flexible they are. Sometimes it's easier to work with them, because you can kind of negotiate a little bit more easily, and you can work with them a little bit more personally because they're smaller. So this is one of the best ways to find companies, but you do actually have to know the names of artists that you're pretty sure are actually licensing our work. So it might not work for you if you're not one of those people who just knows a lot of artists or like follows a lot of artists around. I know some artists are artist obsessed and know tons of other artists, but I also know plenty of artists keep to themselves and don't really know anyone else who's an artist. So there are plenty of ways you can find manufacturers, whether or not you're the type who follows a lot of other artists. So this way works for everyone, and it's my favorite way because it's just really fun. If you like to shop, this is the way for you. You literally go into stores and you just pick up products that have art on them. Seriously, go to like your favorite stores that feel like the vibe of your art, and just pick up products, right? Now, a lot of the products aren't going to have enough information on them, but some of them will. So, if you're in Target and you're picking up products, you can start to look for indications of the manufacturer. There might not be a manufacturer name or logo, or there might be, but always look for the manufacturer's information, the name or the logo, and also try looking for the artist's name, because sometimes the artist name is on it, even if the manufacturer isn't. Because remember that there are lots of different levels to getting a product to market. So you have the artist's art, you have the manufacturer who actually makes the product, and then sometimes they're making a product that they are going to give to a particular brand, and then the brand is going to sell it to retailers. So sometimes there's like this extra person in the middle, like this branded, I can't think of an example right now, but say Nike didn't make their own shoes, but they have their finished product, their shoes, are in lots of different stores. So if a manufacturer makes shoes for Nike, and then Nike sells those shoes to tons of different stores who then sell them to the customer, right? So you can sometimes find that there are lots of different companies throughout the process, and so you're looking for identifying information for someone, any of these, a brand, a manufacturer, an artist, anything, because then you can go back to Google and you can just research that name and find out more information about it. And if it's an artist, you can do the same things we talked about before with the artist's website. And looking on the artist's website, or Googling the artist with products and finding out that way. There's just a lot of kind of like wiggly ways to go about doing this. And I think it's important that you think creatively in this part of the process, or you're just going to keep coming up with the same manufacturers that are all like the, 10 big names, right? That'll get boring after a while. But it's not just big stores. I know I mentioned Target, but you can do this with like little boutiques, anywhere that sells products with your art on them. Go to the mom and pop shop down the street, You feel free to look at any size store. It's about finding the name of a manufacturer, not about going to the right store. Though if you go to a store with a vibe that kind of matches the vibe that your customers are looking for, you're more likely to find a manufacturer that's going to be a good fit for you, right? For your art. So let's move forward. Once you've found a big list of manufacturers, or a small list, I'm going to assume that you've done, several of these ideas, next week or in a couple weeks. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to take that master list and try to evaluate the fit for each manufacturer based on how your artwork looks next to the other artwork that they take on, and how your art is going to look on the types of products they produce, right? So you want to make sure before you approach them that your art is actually going to fit in amidst all the other artwork. It doesn't need to look the same, but it needs to go together, It needs to look like it's not a completely different company selling that product, right? And then you also need to make sure that your art, fits right. Like, for instance, some art doesn't look good cropped. And so trying to put it onto fabric might not work, because most fabric needs to be patterned, right? The design needs to crop and pattern. And if your work doesn't do that very well, then fabric things aren't going to really work for you. So trying to license your work for dresses might not be a great fit, right? So make sure that you're paying attention to whether your art actually works for those products as well. This is one of the few areas that you don't actually have to think too hard about your own target market. It does come into play, and I think it usually naturally works itself out if you're thinking about whether your art fits in with the other art that they have and whether your art looks good on those products. But you don't really need to spend a lot of time being focused on your target market. The manufacturer can sort of do that for you. So it's nice to have that little out. So while you do typically have to approach a few manufacturers to get a single yes, it's more important to pick companies that are a perfect fit than to contact all the companies that you've found in a mass rampage of crazy. Don't waste your time contacting companies that are clearly a bad fit. Not only is it a waste of time for you, but it's a waste of time for them. You're going to look bad. Typically this isn't the sort of thing that they're going to go running to other manufacturers blacklisting you or anything, but it's not very professional, not a good thing to do. So do narrow that list down. And then once you've got your short list of who you want to approach, you just need to approach them. It's what we call in the industry, in any business industry, a pitch, right? You know, luckily most of these companies are in the 21st century and they're going to accept submissions via email. Thank goodness, because I know it's a lot easier for most of us to email than to approach someone any other way. Every once in a while, though, you're going to run across a company who really requires you mail a submission. And they usually state this on their website if they're that type of company. And so quickly I want to go over what to do if you're mailing, but I'm going to focus on email. If you're mailing, you want to include a cover letter. And that should follow the same process of the email that I will go over very specifically in a few minutes. And you also want to include photographs of your art, but do not include the actual art itself. You'll never get it back. Don't send gifts. Many companies have policies against sending gifts, and the gift can end up in the trash can, or it can end up in the hands of an intern who has no influence and just likes having free stuff. Right? There are all sorts of ethical things for companies about getting basically bribed to pursue a licensing deal with you. And it's the same way with magazines too. If you happen to start pitching magazines, a lot of magazines don't accept gifts either. So don't send gifts, don't send actual art, but do send photographs of your art and do send a nice cover letter that follows the same pitching process we'll go over for email. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. So the email pitch, okay? This part is the nitty-gritty, the stuff that is really hard to figure out just by trial and error, okay? So if you can submit via email, you probably should. It makes processing time faster. You know, it can still take them months to respond. Licensing is a very slow industry, but sometimes they can respond as soon as a couple days. So it's faster anyway. And it's also a lot simpler and easier for you to prepare. So I would suggest that you email if you can, if you don't see anything telling you not to email. But before you do send an email, you need to do your research. You need to find out whether the company has submission guidelines. And this is on another slide here. So submission guidelines, thankfully, are on a lot of manufacturers' websites, but regrettably, they're not in a standard place. And I really wish that we could, get everyone together on the same page so that these things are so much easier to find. But this is another place where you're going to have to get detective and kind of look around for it and sleuth it out. You want to find the right person to contact and actually address them by name in the email. This makes a huge first impression, so it is even worth it, I think, to call the company's generic phone number and ask for the name and email of the person if you can't find it on their website, right? I call it a pre-inquiry, and the pitch is like the regular inquiry. And you just call and you just say, hey, can you give me the contact information of the person who reviews art for licensing? Simple, right? And then no one has to be the wiser that you called, you're anonymous, it's fine. So a pre-inquiry can be really helpful in finding them if you can't find it on their website. And then you can send it straight to the right person, and that shows that you're serious and you pay attention because you've used their name and you've taken the time to find out, who to approach. Usually most people approach them with, to whom it may concern. So when you approach them by name, it really stands out. So where do you find the submission guidelines? I wish that they were in the same place, but they're not. So you kind of just have to look in all these likely spots. The first one being the footer. Almost always scrolling down to the footer is the most likely place to find everything that you need. The link can be right there. It can be labeled like art submissions or artists or something like that, super simple. And you're like, oh, thank you. But if not, if there's an FAQ page, that can be really helpful. Frequently, one of the questions on the FAQ page is going to literally be, how do you submit art for licensing consideration? And you're like, oh, thank you. There we go. And it'll tell you right there the guidelines. If it's not in the footer, if it's not in the FAQ, try the About page, because they might have info on submissions at the bottom of the About page. And then last, try the Contact page. It might have a link to submission guidelines, or they might mention the right email address to use for submissions, or they might mention like particular people or departments of their company and how to contact those particular departments or people. And so you can kind of narrow down sometimes. If you can't find any guidelines, then I'm going to explain my standard method in a few minutes, which is just sending it by email to the general customer service email address. But again, I do think calling them up and asking for the correct name and email is a better way to go about it. It looks more professional and it's less traceable, right? You're pretty anonymous. So the, standard method. Well, I guess that's not what I wanted to say. The standard method isn't quite the phrase I wanted to use. Send them an email first and say, who do I contact? How do I get in touch? Or call them, which I think is better. So let's go over, I guess I had standard in my head because I titled this slide the standard pitch. And so in my notes it says standard. And I guess I get that all confused in my brain. But so the standard pitch, this is what I think is typically the best method for most situations. You want to make it easy for them, you want to make it short and specific, and you want to make it conversational, and you want to focus on them. So to make it easy for them, this is the most important thing to remember when you pitch by email. and really, like always, whenever you're dealing with any company that's larger than you that can make or break an opportunity for you, you want to focus on making it easy for them. When you're doing your research, make sure that they actually purchase licenses for artwork, right? Rather than like hiring freelance artists, which a lot of companies do, or hire employees that create the artwork. Like some greeting card companies actually hire full-time or part-time employees that create the art for them. It's not a licensing deal. You're not free to do your own thing. Like you're literally employed by them. So you want to make sure that you're approaching companies that actually license work, right? And then you also want to check to see what types of products they use the images on and what kind of designs are typical, and kind of get a good sense for that. This is really important. I know it sounds silly, but researching is really important for making sure that your pitch sounds authentic and professional and not like you copy-pasted it for everyone, right? So this whole principle of making it easy for them also means being really brief. They're super busy, and it's going to look better if you keep things short. So if you couldn't find any submission guidelines, and you haven't done my process of calling ahead of time and asking, who do I contact? Is there a submission process kind of thing? Then the first thing you want to say in your pitch email is, what's your process for licensing new artwork? And then you can go into your standard pitch as if that were the process for licensing, but your asking is giving them the heads up that that they might have a standard method and you're willing to comply to that, but you're not willing to wait, right? So you're going to go ahead and say everything that you want to say, and they can read it or not, and they can direct you to their particular process that they prefer if they don't want to read it, and you can go from there. But otherwise, at least it's there in case they do want to go ahead and read it. Another sip of water. I'm talking so much. Thank you. So the style of the email is important too. You actually want it to feel conversational. It needs to feel kind of casual. And I think this surprises a lot of people, but this creates a human connection, right? When you're cold and professional and formal, it's actually hard for them to imagine that there's a person behind the email that you wrote. So they're actually less likely to feel the need to respond. And when you talk to them like you might talk to an acquaintance, sitting for lunch or whatever, they're going to actually feel a connection to you and want to respond to you. And they're probably also going to want to help you because, it feels right to help another human, right? So they're both more likely to say yes. And if they end up saying no, they're more likely to give you advice and direction on how to move forward along with that no. So it's all in all better for you if you're conversational. Okay? But the trick with being casual like that, is that you still need to very, very, very carefully check for spelling, for grammar, for punctuation, all those things. If you're going to have relaxed language, you can't take it too far and risk looking like you don't know what you're doing, or that you aren't intelligent, or that you wouldn't be professional when the time actually came to get down to the contracts and delivering the artwork. So the grammar, spelling, and punctuation is like that professional note that ensures that you look like someone that they can do business with, even if you're being casual. And of course, there is a line. You don't want to be too casual. Avoid those topics that would make acquaintances kind of look funny at you. Don't talk about politics or religion or bodily functions. The normal things to stay away from, right? But make sure that everything is really top-notch on the grammar front, because that gives it the professional touch that you need for them to really take you seriously. So this last point, focus on them, is pretty important too. You want to phrase the whole email to address their needs and their concerns. So instead of saying something like, I would love to have my art on your products, right? You instead want to say something more like, I can really see your retailers loving a line of bedding with my art on it, because they really seem to love whimsical products. Right, so that's like switching it around to what they are interested in, which is how their retailers are going to react to products with your art on them, right? That's the most important thing for them. And you're not going to get any contracts if the companies don't thoroughly believe that your art is going to help them sell more products. Specifying which products you think your work would be best for is actually another way to make things really easy for them. They don't have to do any initial thought. So you've already come up with the idea for them. And if they aren't into it, they're certainly going to consider your work on other products. They're going to think about other ways that your work might be a fit. But without giving them any starting point, you're making them work really hard for it. So go ahead and tell them, this is where I envisioned. If they sell more than one type of product, I think it's going to look good on this type of product, right? So now that you know kind of the basics, the overview of what's important in the pitch, I want to go over a formula for you for what I think is really a perfect pitch email. And you're going to have to tweak your pitches for every company to address their particular concerns and to reference specifics that match their particular business, but you can build yourself a bit of a skeleton. That's what one of my clients calls it, as a skeleton of a pitch, that it's kind of like a formula that you can plug things into and tweak a little bit around it, but where you won't have to start from scratch every time. So, loading the email skeleton. Let me take another sip of water here. So we talked about that. Start by addressing them by name. Dear Jeff. I'm totally making up a manufacturer, okay? This is not a real person. And then, what is your process for licensing new artwork? Because we mentioned that too, right? If you want, after you've done that, you can include an extremely short bit about who you are. So no more than 2 sentences. Who am I? So maybe it's, I'm Laura, a printmaker in North Carolina, right? That's me. So then you can include that, but you don't have to. Right? You've got a signature. You don't absolutely have to include a line here, but something super short if you do want to include something. Then you want to compliment them. The compliment needs to come as quickly as possible. So if you already know that you're following their submission process, nix that line. Don't ask what their process is. Just, Dear Jeff, and then the compliment. You know, like really, you want to get to the compliment as quickly as possible because that puts people in a good mood. No one reads a compliment about themselves or their company and is like sad, you know? They read it and they're like, this is awesome, I'm great, right? It makes people happy. So you want to start that way because that sets up their mood for the rest of the email. So make sure that if you compliment, it has to be honest and authentic. You can't just say something to fulfill the formula of putting a compliment here. Okay? This is incredibly important. It needs to read as honest and authentic. So that could be like, lately my art has been inspired by the fashion industry, so I recently discovered your company and found myself smitten with your luxurious modern clothing, right? You know, something that feels realistic, like you actually mean that. It can't just be, you have pretty clothing, you know, or I really love your clothes. Like those things are just not, they don't feel authentic enough. They don't feel honest enough. So right after the compliment, while you've got them all happy, you want to tell them what you're emailing for. What is this about? Okay? You may have already, if you couldn't find the submission guidelines, you may have already basically done this part by asking in the first sentence, what is your process for licensing new artwork? But I think it's important to say it a little bit more bluntly here, even if you have mentioned that before. You know, a phrase like, I think my artwork would be a great fit for you, and I'd love to license some of my work to complement your beautiful designs. You know, write it in your own voice, but like specifically say, I'd love to license some of my work to you, right? Excuse me. It's important to say this because it nails it down, it clarifies, it makes sure that you're all on the same page, okay? So now we're on the what kind of art part of the formula. This is where we get specific. This is where we get specific. Remember to be breaking this up into lots of little paragraphs too. You know, this visual wall of text where this whole thing is in one paragraph is a big no-no. People get really overwhelmed by it, and so it usually doesn't even get read. They just like see the email and are like, oh God, and then it either gets ignored and, you know, lingers in their email inbox forever, or they delete it, right? Anyway, so now you say what kind of art you make. I create abstract prints that reflect people's most emotional moments. You know, something that like summarizes what you do. Don't get too freaked out about this. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to summarize everything. It just needs to summarize what you're going to present to them, right? And so if you're presenting to them abstract prints that reflect people's most emotional moments, then that phrase totally makes sense, totally fits, and it should be something that quick. Don't go into some long detail, okay? Really brief. Remember, this is about making it easy on them. You can always talk to them later in more depth about your art and what it means and all that stuff if they're interested, but for the initial contact, you just want to reel them in. It just needs to be intriguing enough that they respond and start a dialogue, okay? So then you want to suggest exactly what you think your work is going to be perfect for, the specific products. So if you can't decide, because some manufacturers have tons and tons of different types of products, and so it's common to like not be able to decide what. If you can't decide, just pick anything, right? This is, you know, important mostly because it makes them feel like you did your research and that you know and you understand their company, not so much that you're going to settle on that particular product and nothing else. So that can be like, I think my work would look perfect next to your existing line of gorgeous artistic skirts, fitting in particularly well next to the Sally Circle skirt and the Abby A line. You know, like put your art into their business with this sentence, and like 2 sentences tops, right? You can also name another artist that they are already licensing that your work kind of dovetails nicely with. That's kosher too. It doesn't have to be particular products. It can be another artist. Anything that lets them know that your work fits in with what they already offer and that you know that you've done your research, right? It's almost more important that they feel like you've done your research than that your work actually does fit, you know? Almost more important. So now the final stretch of this email skeleton for you. You want a link So I usually say link to 3 particular pieces that you think would be a perfect fit, but industry standard, if you are able to, is to link them to a place where they can see 10 to 12 pieces that are a good fit. It's called a style guide in the industry. If you can put together a collection of 10 to 12 pieces that kind of fit together and will all work for that company, that would be ideal. But failing that, 3 pieces that you think are particularly perfect for that company, okay? If you can't decide which ones, you probably should do more research, but if you still can't decide, then pick the pieces that actually get the most attention from people, And if you're living under a rock where no one's seeing your work and so you don't know what anyone likes, then pick the ones that you like the most. The point is to pick, not to obsess, but ideally they would be the ones that are the best fit for that company. So then you say here are links to particular pieces of mine that I think would work well within the Jeff's Luke's clothing company line, whatever. And then you add the links, right? These should be links to either specific pieces or the collection that you've pulled into one page for them that's specifically pieces for them. Don't link them to your entire gallery page and be like, hey, all my work is over here, take a look at it. No, that's awful. Unless it's your licensable work. Sometimes an artist who licenses a lot will have a page on their site that a manufacturer can go to and see all the work that is currently available for licenses. You can do that, but it's extra work, and it's extra work both for you and for the manufacturer to have to sift through all of those. So I find it works better when you have specific pieces that you've already decided work for them. Okay. Also, if you have mock-ups, you can instead link to the mock-ups. You don't have to link to the pieces themselves, like the originals you created. You can link to the mock-ups if you've made them. And, you just say, here are some links to mock-ups of my work on similar products, right? Super simple. So then you hand them the baton. This is what they really want to hear, I guess, because you know that they're the expert and they want to have that confirmed to them. Tell them there are tons more pieces on my website and I'd love for you to look at them if you think that they'd be a better fit or that they'd fill a hole in your product lines. Say you know better than I do, basically. And phrase it however you feel comfortable phrasing it, but basically you're saying, you know more about this than I do, you know your company better than I do, feel free to look at the rest of my website for other work, And then of course give them the link to your website right there in the text, even if it's in your signature. You got to make it easy for them. Everything needs to be ridiculously, silly easy for them. Then you sign off with a very specific instruction. They call this a call to action in business, and that's because you are telling the person to take action. It's very simple, right? Sign off with that very, very specific call to action. I'd love the opportunity to discuss whether my art would be a good fit for your company. Do you have time for a quick meeting next week? Right? So the specific instruction there is the question, give me an answer. Do you have time for a quick meeting next week? Or you could say, I'd love to talk with you on Tuesday. Can please send me an email back with your available times on Tuesday. That's a command rather than a question. Commands and questions work equally well, but you need something that gives them a next step. And that is the key to getting an answer instead of getting lost in the whole shuffle of their inbox, okay? It really increases the number of responses you get. If you take nothing else away from how to pitch from me, take away the idea of ending with a very specific instruction. I swear it works. And it works across all sorts of ways that you might pitch for anything or send an email for any reason. So this isn't just art licensing. This is forever and always. Definitely remember this. And then, of course, end by thanking them and signing off your name, your phone number, your website. And I really do think that you have to have your phone number there. It's really important because they'll see you as a professional business owner, and otherwise they're not going to want to work with you if you don't look like a professional business owner. So the lack of the phone number might not be sudden death, but it could be, they just have so many options for all sorts of artists they could go with. They don't actually need to go with you, especially if you're going to be that stereotypical flaky head in the clouds, doesn't own a phone or won't get on the phone artist, you know? So it's always better if you have the phone number there. You don't necessarily have to answer it. If they call, you can have them leave a message if you're too scared to answer it. That would be fine. Leaving a message isn't unprofessional. They just assume that you're in a meeting or something. Okay, so that's the email skeleton. Hopefully you've been taking notes because I know it's like a full-on thing, right? But it's important, and that's what I've seen to really do the best for pitches. So after you've sent that, there's a follow-up process. And there's all sorts of statistics, and I'm not good with numbers, so I don't remember what they are, but there's all sorts of statistics for how much business is closed in the follow-up. And it carries over into the licensing industry too. A lot of deals don't happen because the artist didn't come back at the company and say, hey, did you get my email? And emails, it's just so easy for them to get kind of lost, caught up in everything, like it's missing in their inbox, whatever. It's very helpful to follow up. So I have a 1 week rule. Mark your calendar or mark your to-do list or whatever works for you for 8 days later. I say 8 so that it's not like I approach them on a Monday and then I approach them on a Monday next, because sometimes that can just look weird. So 8 days. If they don't respond in a week, you want to prompt the response, right? Now, sometimes licensing companies won't respond for months, and then out of the blue, they're going to come up with a note saying that they'd like to work with you. But if you can make things happen faster, you probably want to make things happen faster. So following up 1 week later is helpful. You can sometimes get a lot of people to go ahead and respond to you, even if they weren't planning on responding to you yet. So a really simple follow-up email is like, Dear Jeff, I just wanted to make sure you received my email last Tuesday, checking to see if you're licensing new art right now. I'm including it below. Please let me know if you have any questions. And then just copy and paste the original email below your follow-up. You want it to sound friendly and smooth and simple. It needs to be really quick, right? If you still don't hear back, then you actually want to let it lie for a few months, okay? Maybe 4 to 6 months, you can pitch them again with a new idea or with different artwork. Don't feel rejected. They may have never even opened your email in the first place, right? So they haven't even seen your art to be able to reject it. That's very possible. And also don't feel pushy. You actually deserve a yes or a no answer, and you're well within your rights to continue asking them until they give you an answer. The only exception to this is if they explicitly state in their submission guidelines that you're not going to receive response unless it's a yes. And sometimes they will. Sometimes in the submission guidelines it will say, we only respond to artists we are interested in pursuing, or something like that. And if that's the case, then 1 to 2 follow-ups is plenty, and you don't need to follow up after that. And do still follow this 1 week and then 6 month rule, 4 to 6 months. You might be pushy, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. If you pitch, if you pitch them and they've said, we were going to respond to you if we like you, and you keep following up and you keep following up and you keep following up, it comes across as pushy, It also comes across as pushy if you pitch more than 2 ideas in like a 3 to 5 year period. These numbers are kind of wishy-washy because it sort of depends, but typically, licensing moves slower than other industries. The process of getting a licensing contract together can take like more than a year sometimes, and sometimes it can be a lot faster, but sometimes it can take a long time. And so, if they've heard from you within the past 2 years, they probably remember hearing from you if they open the email, and so when you approach them again, it can feel really pushy if you're approaching them a lot, right? So be cautious, but don't be too cautious. I know we tend to err on the side of caution, and it's usually too far, right? So it's usually better to follow up than to not. And you're totally going to forget how long it's been, and suddenly it's going to be like 8 months or a year instead of the 4 to 6 months. So I typically say use a spreadsheet Put the dates into your calendar as well, but the spreadsheet's kind of nice because then you can see what the exact date was that you last approached them, and you can also see what pieces you presented to them. You just keep as much information as you want in the spreadsheet. It's super easy. And then put the date on your calendar so that you remember, okay, 6 months later, I will remember to do this, right? I swear it helps. It sounds silly, but otherwise it really can be 8 months, a year. I mean, I forget these things all the time, and all of my clients do too. So calendars, spreadsheets, anything you can do to remind yourself. So that's how you pitch a manufacturer. If you have questions, which I know some of you probably do, feel free to put them in the chat below. The chat's been weirdly quiet today, which I'm surprised about. It's usually very active. But if you have a question, that's where it goes, is in that chat box, and I will read the question and answer it for you. And I'll be doing Q&A in just a couple minutes, but because there is a delay, I think it's 30 seconds or something from when I'm talking to when you actually hear me talk. So I'll do Q&A in a minute, and I'll answer everything that you have. So go ahead and type your questions in. But I did want to talk a little bit today about what you can do next. So I know it was kind of a longish lecture, not my longest, I'm verbose. We talked about a lot of different nuances to the process of licensing, but we really only covered 2 parts of the licensing process: the finding of the manufacturer and the initial approach, right? That's not a lot. So if you're serious about licensing, it's only going to get you into the first conversation with the manufacturer. So closing the deal, making sure you don't get screwed by the contract, actually delivering the artwork, getting paid, those are all huge parts of the process too. I would love to have been able to have covered those today, but it just takes too much time to cover all this stuff. I can't do it for free, I have to put it into a course. So I did. I've had this course out for a while now, but I actually just wrapped up a bunch of updates on it late last night. I was cooking through the last things that I wanted to do, and then I'm planning on in the next couple weeks also having an audio version and a PDF version available in the course as well. So I've made a ton of updates to it, and it goes over all of these processes that we haven't had a chance to talk about here, all the next steps after you approach the manufacturer, from deal memos all the way to the paycheck, right? It's called Artistic License. Here, I'll show you the picture, the pretty logo. It's called Artistic License. It's actually my favorite program I offer. And I know it can be kind of a stretch to spend money when you're trying to make money. I've been there. When I first started my business, it was very stressful too, but I find that it really helps to fill the gaps that you have. I don't think that it's good to spend money willy-nilly, but if you know that there is a place that you are missing information, if you can fill that gap, it's better to fill that gap. So if you don't really understand the way licensing works, if some of the terminology confuses you, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I tell you that there's a deal memo, this is the course for you. It's actually not even that expensive. I've made it as affordable as I can. It's 1/10 of what your advance is going to be when you sign your first deal. So assuming that you go through my process and do all the steps, you'll end up with your first deal, within a year, and you'll pay yourself back tenfold for this course, right? So the link here is on the page, on the slide, but in case you're just listening and not looking at the computer screen, I'll spell it out for you. It's lauracgeorge.com/product/artistic-license. And I'll send out an email too with the recording and a link to get the course again. The program reviews the beginning bits that we went over with the lecture and some stuff before that, even how to prepare your art so that you're ready to approach the manufacturers. And it goes over all of that, and then it goes over your initial offer, how to negotiate with them, what to watch out for, the legal side of things, how to draft an agreement, how to hire a lawyer, how to know if you need one, all those gotchas that come up that like can benefit the manufacturer but actually end up hurting you, right? All the different ways to get paid, what are common amounts to get paid, what do you do once you sign the contract? Is there anything else you're responsible for? All that stuff. Pretty much everything you need to know in order to sign your first deal. And I even have an interview with a lawyer and an interview with a licensing agent, everything you need. And you'll have access to any updates I do in the future too. So if you have a question that isn't answered in the course, I'll probably create content for it, put it in the course, and you instantly get it as soon as it's done, right? I've added all these new bonuses. It's very exciting. I'm pretty thrilled with the updates to the course. If you have any questions about the course, let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to move on to questions about the content today. I don't want to dwell on artistic license too much. If it's right for you, I'm super excited. Go over and grab it. If it's not right for you, that's fine. And if you have questions about it, feel free to ask in the comments box or send me an email if you want to ask them privately. Either way is fine. My email is laura@lauracgeorge.com. So now I'm going to get to questions. Q&A. Okay, so Laura asked earlier, what if two different publishers want to license the same image? Even if that's legally fine, is it unethical? That's a very good question. It's legally fine if the contract obliges. So contracts can be very complicated. You're not signing like a standard one-size-fits-all contract and like every artist signs the same license away, right? You can sign a license that's as broad as giving someone the rights to use a particular image for forever, or even as broad as giving someone the rights to use all of your images for forever, which would be a horrible deal. Don't do that. But it can also be as narrow as saying something like, okay, you can license image A for for 1 year and only in North America and only on stationery products or even only on notebooks. It can be really super specific. And it can even be specific in type of stores too. There are like different names for like big stores versus little stores, and you can actually put in the contract which type of stores they're allowed to sell to. So they're only allowed to sell to like the Walmarts and Targets of the world and not to the like tiny boutiques or vice versa or anything. Or it doesn't have to be in there at all, but it can be really specific or really broad. So legally, it's often completely fine to license the same image to lots of different manufacturers. Ethically, I tend to believe it's totally fine as long as it's not crossing into competition territory. So for instance, if you had licensed 5 images that kind of go together, kind of have your vibe, to a company to print on notebooks, and then another company comes to you and says that they want binders that have those same 5 images on them. That's kind of like in the same space. That's a little competitive. And so that's kind of like a gray zone. While it's legally totally fine, it's kind of ethically not so fine, right? Because binders and notebooks are kind of in the similar kind of field. And that's not so great. And in an instance like that, I always find it's helpful to go to the person that you've licensed with first and say, hey, I've got this offer, I'm thinking of accepting it, I'm thinking of doing this, but I want to give you the opportunity first because I think it sort of crosses into your territory. Would you prefer to be the one that produces this, right? I forgot I can share my screen with you while I talk. I know everyone likes to see my face. Legally, almost always it's going to be fine. Just read over your contract and make sure that your contract says it's fine too. And then ethically, it really comes down to like you really thinking about the situation and that particular of the situation and deciding like, does this cross over into their territory? Is this competition for them? And you really want to avoid creating competition for your manufacturers, partially just because it's not nice, and then also because they'll keep you on and they'll work with you again if you're good to them, right? Sherry asks if I do evaluations or assessments of an artist's work and whether it would be suitable for licensing. Sherry, I don't actually have anything set up for that in particular. I haven't got something I can just tell you where to go buy, but send me an email. I'm sure I can do that. I've just got to, run through real fast how much time that'll take me and come up with a price for you, send me an email, laura@lauracgeorge.com, and just remind me of what you're asking, because I'll forget. And sure, I'm sure we can sort something out. And I will say that most art is suitable for licensing. It's just suitable for different types of licensing. Most 2D art, I should make that caveat. 3D art is a little bit dicier with licensing, but 2D art is almost always suitable for licensing. It's just that, certain work is going to work for certain products, like we talked about patterning earlier, which is kind of the most common thing to talk about with this. And if your work doesn't pattern well, that doesn't mean that you can't license. It just means that you'll do better licensing your art on like things that you can just have your art in full, uncropped, like a calendar or a mug or a t-shirt or a wall clock, a shower curtain, like things where your art can stay in its, square, rectangular, whatever kind of form and not need to be cropped or patterned, right? Whereas if your work patterns really well, you can go on almost anything. Luck of the draw. Jen asks, hello, Laura. Could fine art photographer can apply for licensing to manufacturers, or is it just for painters and such? No, Jen, it's definitely for photographers too. Tons of photographers license their work. Oh my gosh, huge. And in fact, it opens you up to a tertiary industry that I don't talk about in the course because I don't know very much about it because I don't really work with photographers very often, which is licensing stock imagery. And that's actually very huge. You can make a ton of money using your photographs as stock images that get put onto stock image sites and get sold to graphic designers, business owners, anyone who needs nice looking photographs to use typically in their business dealings. So yes, totally good industry for you, and not just in the stock imagery, also on products for sure. There's a shower curtain that I desperately want. This beautiful photograph of a really raging seawater, and I've wanted it for so long, but it's awfully expensive for a shower curtain, and it comes from somewhere in Europe. I can't remember where, but I had to do a currency conversion, and it was $400 or something for a shower curtain. I just couldn't bring myself to it, but I've looked at it many, many times and keep wishing for it. Beautiful photograph and shower curtain, so totally doable. Lee asks, mock-ups. Does that mean I could Photoshop my work onto a manufacturer's product? Yes, sort of. I wouldn't say onto a manufacturer's product. I would say onto a product. You can definitely hire a graphic designer to do this for you if you're not good at Photoshop, but common ones I see are mocking it up onto a mug or a notebook or a duvet cover, because those are fairly easy to get the image in Photoshop to kind of conform to the product. But you just get a picture of a bed, and you overlay. I'm talking in terms I don't really understand because I'm not very good with Photoshop, but you basically overlay your photograph onto the bedspread on the bed, right? And there's a duvet cover, right? I make it sound easy. It's not easy. You can hire someone to do it for you. But that's mock-ups, and they don't look real usually, and that's fine. This is kind of how a lot of manufacturers are used to first addressing an artist. They frequently see mock-ups, so they don't necessarily need to look realistic. It's just giving a manufacturer an idea of how your work would crop and how it would kind of lay on things, and terminology that is all manufacturing, and I'm not a manufacturer. But yeah, it's good. Mock-ups are good, but not absolutely necessary. You can certainly approach people without them. Is there anything wrong with licensing different images to different manufacturers at once? Isn't this what successful artists do? So I touched on that a little bit a couple minutes ago. Yes, licensing images to multiple manufacturers is totally okay. Licensing the same image to multiple manufacturers is totally okay, definitely from a legal standpoint, and usually from an ethical standpoint. Having one company print your work on water bottles while another company prints your work on cell phone cases, even if they're the same images or different ones, totally fine. Those companies aren't competing with each other. There's no reason why they should be mad that you're using your work somewhere else too. And that's, yes, as you said, how a lot of artists who are successful in the licensing industry, how they get there is by having a lot of contracts. It's very hard to make a significant amount of money from one contract, especially when you're new to the industry and you haven't really been proven yet. So having lots of contracts that, if you have 10 contracts that all are $2,000 a year or thereabouts, then you're making $20,000 a year, right? And that's much better than having one contract that makes you $3,000, or $2,000 or whatever. So definitely, it's better to have lots of contracts. And I recommend that you go after any sort of product that you think your art would look good on and try to get your work licensed to a manufacturer who will make that product for you. Lee asks, is there any way to find out if a particular manufacturer is traditionally difficult to work with? That is a great question. So no scientific way. There's no database that's like the Better Business Bureau or something. But Googling tends to help. If you Google working with company X or whatever, that can sometimes, you can come up with forums or social media threads that kind of talk about it. But what I find is the most effective way to really get the dirt on whether you want to work with a manufacturer is find out what other artists have licensed with them in the past and go talk to them. Literally, look at the products that they've sold, what artists had their art on them. Okay, go to that artist's website, hit the contact button and say, look, I'm thinking about approaching such and such company and I want to make sure that they're reputable. And you can almost always tell. The artists are going to be pretty honest with you, especially if it was a bad deal. They're probably going to tell you, don't do it. It's going to be horrible, And you can usually tell how good of a deal it was if they're on the positive side by how enthusiastic they are. Kind of read between the lines. If they're being wishy-washy, oh, it was good, that company was easy to work with, then it's the kind of deal where you're not going to get screwed, but you're not going to be I've made a new best friend manufacturer, right? And if they're super ecstatic, that means the company really treated them very well, was super easy to work with, and, over accommodating. And, of course, those are the dream deals, but not all companies are going to be like that. Okay, great, Jen. That looks like all the questions. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box. I'm going to give a quick reminder about artistic license, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. So remember, if you want to take the next step, if you want to know what comes after just initially talking to the manufacturer and saying, hey, here's my art, there's a lot that goes into it. There are a lot of ways that you can end up in a bad situation, and I'd go over all of that legal stuff in my course, and I just love to help walk you through it. I'd love to help you get your first deal, and many more deals to come. So if you are interested, feel free, hop over to lauracgeorge.com/product/artistic-license, and I'll send you the recording in an email in a couple days. Thanks everybody. Bye.